The boy who learned to skate on shifting ground. He was just a teenager. No trophies lining his wall, no cameras pointed his way, no crowd holding its breath for him. He was simply a boy in the middle of practice when the ice beneath his blades began to move. Not crack, not splinter, move. In under a minute, everything he had built his life around, his training, his ambitions, the very city he called home, was gone. But here's the thing most people never fully grasped. That moment didn't simply alter the course of his life. It forged the version of him the world would one day struggle to find words for. The strange part? It nearly ended everything before it ever had a chance to begin. The ice didn't give way all at once. It announced itself with a sound most people would have brushed off entirely, a low, deep vibration, barely noticeable, almost like something stirring far beneath the surface. Yuzuru Hanyu was mid-session at his home rink in Sendai, Japan. The date was March 11th, 2011, early afternoon. Everything up to that point had been completely ordinary. Repetitions, corrections, the quiet rhythm of a skater locked into his craft. He pushed through a sequence, edges precise, posture aligned, mind focused, and then the overhead lights shuddered. Just barely. Just enough to feel out of place. For a moment, he kept going. That's how the human mind works when reality stops making sense, it stalls. It reaches for something familiar, to explain away what it just felt. Maybe the building had settled. Maybe it was nothing. But then the ice moved again. Not a hairline crack, not a fracture spreading across the surface. Movement. A ripple traveling beneath his blades. If you've never stood on a skating rink, it's difficult to truly convey how deeply unnatural that sensation is. Ice is supposed to be a contract, solid, obedient, predictable beneath you. This was none of those things. The surface rolled slightly at first, then enough to throw off his balance entirely. He stopped, not because he understood what was happening, but because something deeper than thought told his body to. Around him, other skaters were arriving at the same wordless realization. Small hesitations, eyes drifting upward toward the ceiling, sideways toward each other. Nobody speaking yet, and then everything let go at once. The building lurched hard, violent, without apology. The sound that followed left no room for interpretation. Metal groaning, glass moving, heavy things going where they had no business going. That was when instinct completely took over. Hanyu drove toward the boards and vaulted off the ice. No pause to remove his skates, no reaching for blade guards. He ran actual steel blades hammering against concrete flooring, each step sending a sharp, grinding shriek through the air, each stride destroying the very tools his career depended on. In that moment, it didn't matter. Outside, the ground wasn't cooperating either. People were clustering in parking lots and on sidewalks, some stunned, some frozen in place, others moving without any clear destination, all of them running on the same animal impulse. Get away. Just get away. The air felt different, not dramatic. Not the way disaster gets dressed up in movies. Just heavy, dense with something unspoken. And standing in the middle of it was a 16-year-old who, minutes earlier, had been mentally rehearsing jump sequences. Now he was standing in a world that had stopped following any rules he recognized. The rink at his back, his sanctuary, his daily structure, the one place on Earth where everything behaved the way it was supposed to, was no longer a safe place to be. That detail carries more weight than it might first appear, because for someone like him, the ice was never just a training facility. It was order. It was the one environment where his effort translated directly into result, where the rules stayed consistent. And now even that had been stripped away. There was no clarity standing there in that parking lot, no dramatic sense of destiny forming in the wreckage. Just confusion, noise, and a question that had no answer yet. What do you do when the one place you trust stops holding you? Long before the earthquake, there was another thing he couldn't control: breathing. It didn't happen constantly. That was part of what made it so unsettling. One moment, everything felt fine. The next, a tightness in the chest, shallow air, a quiet panic assembling itself without warning. Yuzuru Hanyu had been diagnosed with asthma as a toddler, around age 2, severe enough to shape the way he moved through the world, to place invisible limits on how long he could push himself, to create a version of childhood that looked a little different from everyone else's. Most kids throw themselves at the world without a second thought. They fall, they get up, they keep moving. For him, there was always a ceiling, an invisible one. And if you've ever experienced something like that, or watched someone you care about navigate it, you understand that it doesn't stay in the body. It migrates into how you see yourself. You grow careful, more aware than your peers, sometimes quieter than you'd like to be. He wasn't the loudest kid in the room. He wasn't the one people looked at and immediately imagined great things for. He gravitated toward books and video games and solitary hours until, almost by accident, the ice entered his life. It started with nothing more strategic than following his older sister to the rink one day. No grand plan, no deliberate first step toward anything. Just a boy wandering into a cold building and discovering that something felt different there. Cold air, which typically aggravates asthma, had a strange and unexpected effect on him. It helped. Not perfectly, not reliably, but enough to matter. The rink became one of the few places where his body didn't feel like a liability. When you're a kid who has spent years quietly navigating physical limitations, and you suddenly find a place where your body cooperates, you hold on to that place with everything you have. He did. But this is where the story resists the version people prefer to tell. The version where natural talent announces itself immediately, where destiny is obvious from the first day on the ice. That story is tidier. It's also not this one. He fell constantly. He struggled with elements other kids seemed to absorb almost effortlessly. He watched skaters around him progress while he went back to square one on the same movements, again and again. There was one moment during a summer training camp, a spontaneous spin comparison with a more advanced skater where the result was clear and undeniable. He lost, not close. But the way it affected him was telling. He didn't shrink from it. He went home and dismantled his entire spinning technique from scratch. Entry angle, body positioning, arm placement, the kind of microscopic detail most people wouldn't even register. That pattern, losing ground, then obsessively rebuilding, would become the signature of his entire career. Still, none of this made him appear exceptional at the time. He was a quiet, slight kid from Sendai, training in a discipline that even within Japan couldn't promise a stable future. And then, in 2002, something cracked open his imagination. The Salt Lake City Winter Olympics were on television. He was 7 years old, watching like millions of other children. But something about those skaters, the way they commanded an entire arena without uttering a single word, the weight of what they carried in each movement reached him in a way he couldn't shake. He turned to his family and said something simple. He wanted to go there, not as a passing wish, not as the kind of thing a child says and forgets by morning. He meant it, and he didn't let go. When the trembling finally stopped, the silence that followed didn't feel like peace. It felt suspended, like the world had inhaled and forgotten to breathe out. Hanyu stood outside the rink, still wearing his skates, caught somewhere between the athlete he had been 20 minutes ago and the reality now surrounding him. You can't prepare for that distance between two versions of yourself. The earthquake that struck Japan that day wasn't just destructive. It was one of the most powerful ever recorded in human history. Coastlines shifted, roads split apart, buildings fell, and along the shore, something even more devastating was already gathering itself into a wave. The full scale of it wouldn't be known for hours. But standing in that parking lot, he knew enough. Nothing was stable. His home was damaged. The rink was shutting down indefinitely. The one environment where his entire inner world made sense had vanished. His family relocated to an evacuation shelter, a school gymnasium housing several hundred displaced people. Cold concrete floors, thin blankets, no privacy. The kind of sustained discomfort that doesn't announce itself dramatically, it just gradually wears away at you. Aftershocks came in the night without warning, sometimes mild, sometimes strong enough to wake everyone in the building, strong enough to remind them that what had happened might not be finished happening. Somewhere in that gymnasium, among people who had lost their homes and their loved ones, was a 16-year-old trying to figure out what any of this meant for him. And this is where the story gets flattened when people retell it. They say he kept going, as if that were simple, as if there were no space between the earthquake and the comeback. But there was a period, not brief, not tidy, when stopping felt like the more honest choice. He considered quitting. Not loudly, not in a way that made headlines. Just a quiet, private reckoning with whether continuing made any sense at all. People around him were grieving, rebuilding from nothing. And he was supposed to care about skating programs and competition rankings? It sat wrong with him. That internal conflict, the sense that ambition felt almost indecent against the backdrop of real suffering, doesn't show up in any statistic. But it can stop a person completely if it settles in deep enough. The decision to continue wasn't heroic in the way people later framed it. It was uncertain, uncomfortable, and probably revisited more than once. But something small began shifting. Ice time appeared in fragments, temporary slots in rinks in other cities, borrowed hours, nothing consistent. He trained when and where he could, sometimes far from home, under conditions that bore no resemblance to real preparation. And slowly, without any formal announcement, He chose a direction, not with confidence, not with a clear picture of where it led, just a quiet refusal to let stopping be the answer. Then something unexpected happened. He began performing in small exhibitions, charity events for communities still recovering from the disaster. No judges, no rankings, no pressure attached to difficulty scores. Just programs skated in front of people who had lived through the same thing he had. And those audiences weren't watching for technical perfection. They were watching because for a few minutes, something in the room lifted. The weight became briefly bearable. And when the music ended, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of something. That feedback doesn't come with a number attached to it, but it stays with you longer than any score ever could. Without entirely realizing it, Hanyu was learning that skating could be something more than a competition. It could carry meaning for other people. And once a skill becomes tied to that kind of purpose, you don't approach it the same way anymore. You protect it differently. You carry it with a different kind of seriousness. By the time the world began keeping score of him, his body was already quietly paying the price. The performances looked effortless. The expression never broke. But beneath that surface, damage was accumulating: ankles, ligaments, repeated strain, layered over repeated strain. In 2014, during a warm-up at the Cup of China, a full-speed collision sent him into the ice hard enough to draw blood. Most people assumed he was done for the day. 50 minutes later, he came back out, bandaged, still disoriented, not fully processing the extent of what had just happened to him. He fell 5 times during that program. When it ended, he didn't take a bow. He simply collapsed into it, not dramatically, just completely. People called it resilience, strength, determination. Those things were in it. But there was something else too, the weight of carrying a responsibility that had grown far larger than any individual ambition. By then, he wasn't simply skating for himself. He was skating for everyone who had watched him stand in that parking lot in Sendai and choose to keep going anyway. He collected every record the sport had to offer. 2 Olympic gold medals, world titles, programs that people didn't just applaud, they studied them, rewound them, tried to identify exactly what it was that made them feel so different from everything else. And then, at the peak of everything, he pointed himself at the one thing nobody had ever successfully done: the quadruple axel. 4.5 rotations. A jump so technically demanding it had never been cleanly landed in competition. He didn't need it for any strategic reason. He simply wasn't finished yet. At the Beijing Olympics, the attempt didn't land. He fell, finished 4th, no medal. But the moment didn't feel like failure. It felt deliberate, like the outcome was never entirely the point. 7 months later, he stepped back from competitive skating entirely. What followed was something the sport had genuinely never seen. Solo performances, full theatrical shows built entirely around a single skater, built around expression and story rather than scores. If you trace the arc of all of it, from a 7-year-old watching the Olympics on a small screen, to a teenager running across concrete in skate blades during an earthquake, to a man filling entire arenas on his own terms, a single thread runs through all of it. Control. The thing the ice took from him that March afternoon. And maybe that's what the whole story was always quietly about. Not medals, not records, not even greatness in the way the world usually defines it. Just learning how to stand on something unstable and still choose how to move. Because even now, if you watch him skate, there's a quality that never fully disappears. Not fear, not hesitation. Something quieter than both. The awareness of someone who learned early and in the most unforgiving possible way that nothing beneath your feet is ever truly guaranteed, and who decided to skate anyway.